As the small convoy climbed the winding mountain road, an unusual sight unfolded. An American M4 Sherman's tank led the way, followed by U.S. infantry. Marching alongside them were German Wehrmacht soldiers, still wearing the same gray-green uniforms they had worn for years, only now they were allies. When they reached Castle Itter, the French prisoners rushed into the courtyard. At first they smiled at the sight of the American tank. Then they noticed the German soldiers standing beside it. For a moment no one knew what to think. Former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud stared in disbelief. General Sir Maurice Gamelin looked from the Americans to Major Josef Sepp Gangl, trying to understand how this impossible alliance had become reality. There was little time for questions. Lieutenant Jack Lee Jr. immediately inspected the castle's defenses. Although its medieval stone walls looked strong, they weren't built to withstand modern machine guns and anti-tank weapons. The main gate was especially vulnerable, so Lee positioned his Sherman tank, Besotten Jenny, directly in front of it to block the only road into the castle. American soldiers occupied the towers and windows, while Gangl's Wehrmacht troops reinforced weak points along the walls. Inside, the French prisoners carried ammunition, prepared bandages, and helped build makeshift barricades. Even the famous tennis champion Jean Borotra insisted on helping. As evening approached, an uneasy silence settled over the mountains. Then it was broken. A German scout ran into the courtyard, breathing heavily. "The SS? They're coming!" Everyone rushed to the walls. Through the trees below, dozens of Waffen-SS soldiers appeared. Spreading across the hillside, more emerged every minute. They carried rifles, machine guns, and Panzerfaust anti-tank launchers. The defenders were badly outnumbered. Just before dawn, the first rifle shot echoed through the valley. Within seconds, machine gun fire slammed into the castle walls. Stone shattered. Windows exploded inward. Lee waited until the attackers moved within range. Fire! The castle erupted. American M1 Garands fired from the towers. German Karabiner 98 Kate rifles answered beside them. For perhaps the only time in World War II, American soldiers and German Wehrmacht troops fought shoulder to shoulder against the Waffen-SS. The Sherman tank's 75mm gun blasted the hillside, forcing the first SS assault to fall back. But the battle was only beginning. The SS quickly adapted. Using the forest for cover, they crawled closer to the castle. Then a hidden Panzerfaust team fired. The rocket slammed into Besotten Jenny. A massive explosion shook the entrance. Flames burst from the engine, and thick black smoke filled the air. The defenders escaped the burning tank, but their strongest weapon was gone. The SS sensed the opportunity. Before sunrise, Jean Borotra climbed to a narrow opening in the rear wall of Castle Itter. Outside lay a steep hillside, covered with pine trees, loose rocks, and thick brush. It was the only possible escape route. Lieutenant Jack Lee Jr. gave him a quick map showing the nearest American positions. "If you make it through," Lee said, "send everyone you can." Borotra nodded. Without another word, he slipped through the gap and disappeared down the mountainside. Only seconds later, rifle shots echoed through the forest. The SS had spotted movement. Bullets tore through the trees as Borotra sprinted downhill, weaving between rocks and branches, with the speed that had once made him one of the world's greatest tennis players. Several times he nearly lost his footing, but he never stopped. Within moments, he vanished into the forest. No one inside the castle knew whether he had survived. Back at the castle, the SS launched another assault. Machine gun fire raked the walls while assault teams rushed toward the main gate. American and German defenders fought desperately, firing only when they had a clear target to save ammunition. Major Josef Sepp Gangl moved from position to position, encouraging his men and directing fire wherever the attack was strongest. Then tragedy struck. Former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud stepped into an exposed section of the courtyard to observe the fighting. An SS sniper immediately took aim. Gangl saw the danger. Without hesitating, he ran across the open courtyard and shoved Reynaud behind cover. At that exact moment, the sniper fired. The bullet struck Gangl in the neck. He collapsed instantly. American medics rushed to him, but there was nothing they could do. The German officer who had chosen to fight beside the Americans had sacrificed his own life to save a former French prisoner. For a few seconds, the courtyard fell silent. Even in the middle of the battle, everyone understood what they had just witnessed. Then the firing resumed. Inspired by Gangl's sacrifice, the remaining Wehrmacht soldiers fought with renewed determination. But their situation was becoming hopeless. Most American riflemen had only a few rounds left. Grenades were almost gone. The disabled Sherman tank still blocked the entrance, but its cannon was silent forever. The defenders knew they could not hold much longer. Then, a deep rumble echoed through the valley. At first, no one recognized the sound. It grew louder. Tank engines. American tank engines. Moments later, olive-drab vehicles appeared around the bend below the castle. Jean Borotra had made it. He had reached nearby U.S. forces and convinced them to race to Castle Itter. The relief column opened fire immediately. Sherman tanks blasted SS positions, while American infantry advanced up the mountain. Caught between the reinforcements outside and the defenders inside the castle, the SS line collapsed. May 5, 1945, Castle Itter, Austrian Alps. The cold mountain air carried the smell of smoke and damp. Pine as silence settled over Castle Itter, a medieval fortress perched high above the Austrian valley. The war in Europe was almost over. Berlin had fallen. Adolf Hitler was dead. Across the continent, German armies were surrendering. But at this lonely castle, the fighting was only beginning. Inside the thick stone walls were some of France's most important prisoners. Former prime ministers Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, General Maurice Gamelin, famous tennis champion Jean Borotra, and several other high-ranking political figures had spent years as hostages of the Nazi regime. For days, their guards had been disappearing. Many SS troops had abandoned their posts, retreating into the mountains as Germany collapsed. But that didn't make the prisoners safer. In fact, it made them even more vulnerable. Nearby Waffen-SS units were still refusing to surrender. Fanatically loyal to Hitler's final orders, they were determined to prevent these valuable prisoners from falling into Allied hands. If they reached the castle first, everyone inside would likely be executed. The prisoners knew they had little time. Just a few miles away, Major Josef Sepp Gangl, an officer in the German Wehrmacht, faced a choice that would define his life. Gangl had watched the Third Reich crumble around him. He had seen SS troops continue killing civilians even after Germany's defeat was inevitable. Refusing to obey pointless orders, he gathered the few soldiers who still trusted him and began protecting Austrian civilians instead of fighting the Allies. Then word reached him about Castle Itter, French prisoners. Almost no defenders, an SS attack expected at any moment. Gangl understood immediately that his small force couldn't stop the SS alone. There was only one option left. He would ask the Americans for help. Carrying a white flag, one of his men reached advancing U.S. forces near the town of Vergel. There, Lieutenant John C. Jack Lee Jr., commander of Company B, 23rd Tank Battalion, listened to an unbelievable request. A German officer wanted to fight with the Americans, not against them. Lee studied the map carefully. His orders were to continue advancing east, not defend an isolated castle. He had only 14 American soldiers and a single Sherman tank. Waiting for reinforcements would be the safer choice. But the prisoners didn't have time. Lee looked at his men. "We're going." Within the hour, American tanks rolled toward Vergel, where they met Major Gangl face to face. Only days earlier, they had been enemies. Now they shook hands. Together, American soldiers and German Wehrmacht troops climbed the mountain road toward Castle Itter. None of them realized they were about to fight one of the strangest and most extraordinary battles of World War II.